Well, I mean, to be honest, I did not address it. I didn't address it. The next hurdle is I eventually move into the property. So January 1st comes around. I move all my things in there. I'm enthusiastic. I start painting my unit. My friend is helping me. I'm in there for a few days and my friends come out and they're like, hey, my car isn't there anymore, and I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, my car isn't in front of your house anymore. So I talked to all my tenants. I know one of my tenants had a security camera. I'm like, hey, can I have access to that? And she's like, no, but the neighbor across the street has a great security camera. She's like, you can go ask it for them. So I talked to the neighbor and I find out that the girl who sent me over there, her little brother stole my friend's car.
So you guys were inside the unit doing rehab work, and he went out to go to his car, and the car was gone. And ultimately, it was the tenant that their family member that carjacked it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
What'd you do?
So what happens now? File a report. What?
So I find out, and I'm at the police station, and I look at, and this is a part of property management where it's relationship management, where he's like, look. He's like, you could do one or two things. He's like, you can go and try to get your car back, and not get the police involved, or you can get the police involved and, you could be in for 20 years of getting your house egged, paintballed, messed with, Fuller Park, Bridgeport. It's one of those communities where everybody knows each other. So a lot of, if there's an opportunity to solve an issue without police involvement, sometimes it's to your benefit. And in property management, I would probably, Mark, you might be able to comment, but that's something that maybe not just on the South Side, but everywhere it might be beneficial, is maybe the, law enforcement isn't your first go-to if something illegal might be happening in your apartment.
So that was the advice that the Chicago police gave you, right? Did I hear that right?
Yeah. And so I'm like, look, I'll go up there, but I don't know these people, I don't know what they're about. I'm like, can a police at least come with me? I'm not trying to arrest them. I'm not, whatever. So we go up there and the police, didn't do a very good job in my opinion, but they did tell the tenant, they're like, look, if the car spontaneously shows up tomorrow, all this stuff, and we get a call the next day that it's in the middle of an alley, just sitting there. So we ended up getting the car back, and that it was upsetting, but it is what it is. We ended up getting the car back, and it was almost like a silent apology from them. So they didn't know that it was my car. I highly doubt that they did.
So how about those conversations going on in that apartment? Like, man, you sold the landlord the new owner's car.
Well, also you live in the building. You see these people. Hey, how's it going?
Did you sleep there that night? Like you that happens. Like, did you sleep there that night? Did you have doubts about living in that building? Like, what was going through your mind at that point?
Yeah, so I definitely had definitely upset, upset as anybody would be. I stayed with my girlfriend at the time quite a bit after that. And the first part is it's also COVID where you can't evict people. Evictions aren't going on. So you have to be strategic about how you're handling tenants during these times. Sometimes. So what I ended up doing is and to be fair, the guy that did it, he was about 16 years old. So I'm not happy about it, but I also am not in the business to throw anybody in jail. I don't want to ruin someone's future. I ended up going to the house, to them a few days later. And I'm just like, look, I know individually you guys didn't do it. And I'm like, but just stay out of my business. Like, just don't let that happen again. Don't do that, but it's COVID. And to be honest, there's not much you can do. And that's the worst part about it is and every 2 weeks you have the news playing, oh, no eviction, new extended eviction moratorium. So it was pretty like, what did I get myself into?
That's crazy.
Yeah. So you're probably talking to Mike Baker throughout all this, who great guy. Cash for keys come up. Like, did you guys start talking some of these alternate strategies?
Yeah. So I offered them cash for keys, but they were smart enough to know that they didn't, he told me I talked. So they moved, it's a 2-bed, 1-bath, and they moved over 9 family members in there. So I talked to the dad, and I'm just like, look, I could offer you X amount of money to leave, which was a generous amount. And he straight up told me, he's like, Joe, the realization is that we don't have where to go. And if I accept these cash for keys, he straight up told me, he's like, I know I could stay here longer and it'll be much more valuable than what you're offering me. So he basically said no. And he also told me, he's like, look, Joe, he's like, I've been evicted 3 or 4 times. He's like, I'm a professional at this.
Oh, geez.
And so I'm like, all right. At this point, it's a few months later. I start the eviction process. Mark, you gave me Halstead Law Group. Highly recommend them. So my lawyer's like, all right, this is what you need to do. You need to get all proof. You need to go down to the police station, get all police records. I go down to the police station, and between November and March, they had the police called on them 12 times. So it was just a lot. I had videos of stealing the car. So I guess, Mark, you could tell me, is there an eviction moratorium in Illinois right now still?
There is going on. So there's a whole bunch of stuff with the CDC and it being overruled by the Supreme Court and all that. But so by the time this airs, I don't want to put anything kind of weird out there. So
okay. So just so you know, at this time, it's September 1st. At the time, and during COVID, you couldn't evict for non-payment issues, right? But you could evict if they were a danger to your building. So one day, my 3rd water bill comes in, and it's substantially higher than what it should be, which tells me there's a leak, right? So I'm just like, I have to handle this. I get a plumber over there. We're looking at the building, and he's like, hey, the leak's coming from the tenant that I'm having issues with apartment. And so I knock on their door, and of course they're not letting me in. Every time I've ever knocked on their door, they're like, hey, we have COVID. Like, you're not coming in here. They've had COVID 15 times. And like, if you keep knocking on the door, we're going to call the police. So I'm like, all right. So I ended up calling the police, and the police come. I tell them what's going on. There's an emergency in the building. They're like, look. So the tenants are like, hey, we'll let the plumber in, and only the plumber. And I'm like, that's fine. I just want this fixed. The plumber fixes it, and I leave. And about 8 hours later of having a standoff with my tenants, and I get a call from a neighbor, and they're like, hey, the ambulance is at your apartment. They're like, your tenant's mom OD'd in the apartment. And right then I realized that they weren't letting, and she's like, her arms are blue. She's been passed out for a while. And I'm like, well, the reason why they weren't letting us in is because they had someone that was overdosed in the apartment the whole time. The plumber was in there. So that was, and when I get to the eviction that was my key where I'm like, okay, sweet. And then it had nothing to do with the overdose. It had everything to do with that there was a leak in the apartment, and they were not reporting it, nor were they letting me in. They were a cause of potential damage to my building. I could evict them. They were causing harm. So I get with my lawyer, and we end up going through the eviction process, and they were smart because they kept extending the eviction court date. They knew what they were doing. And then the date where the judge was going to rule them get evicted, she raises her hand. She's like, I'll be out in 2 weeks, And so they made an agreement that if she's out in 2 weeks, that this will just get thrown out the window. So these tenants, they managed to, they're just wild. they're just wild. But they also, they were smart enough. They stayed until the last possible moment without getting an eviction. And I give them credit a little bit. They were as calculated as I've ever seen. They were very calculated.
I know. Should use that for good.
Yeah.